Hello, Simon McKinley from Wallaby. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very good. This is the second time that we meet. The last time we spoke, you introduced us to Quokka, and today we are talking about Wallaby, which is also the
Yeah,
name,
that's right.
which is also the name of the company and your main feature, I may say.
It was our first product. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, the first product, and tell me about it. What Wallaby is.
Yeah, sure. So last time we had a look at Quokka, and Quokka gave us the ability to execute a particular code file, right? Wallaby is very similar, but has a kind of different context. So while Quokka runs your code file just as it exists, Wallaby integrates with testing frameworks. It's actually a test runner. So think of your tests as the entry point to what Wallaby is doing, whereas a single file is the entry point to what Quokka is doing. But unlike Quokka, Wallaby knows about all of the files in your project, and it has a whole bunch of features that really make writing tests a lot more productive for developers in the JavaScript and TypeScript world.
Okay, so that's just for JavaScript and TypeScript.
Anything that compiles down to JavaScript, so it would work with CoffeeScript as well, but that's kind of the niche right now.
And Wallaby can be used on large projects, only for small tests. What is it good for?
Wallaby's good for both small projects and large projects. We've done a lot of work to make sure that Wallaby runs super fast. That's one of the things that we really focus on is that fast developer feedback loop. That is writing your code and knowing something is broken. So yes, Wallaby works on some very large projects, and it works really great on smaller projects as well. And we actually integrate with a number of different editors. So we have support for Visual Studio Code, which we're going to be looking at today. JetBrains editors. So any of the JetBrains editors, you probably wouldn't want to use one that doesn't support JavaScript or TypeScript. So we see most of our customers are using WebStorm or IntelliJ IDE.
Hmm. Makes
Um,
sense.
and Visual Studio, we have support for Sublime Text and Atom.
Okay, so I can say that without further ado, let's head forward to your IDE and see what Wallaby is all about.
Yeah, okay, let's jump in.
Okay.
So what you want to do is you want to go to the extensions, the VS Code extensions menu, and just type Wallaby, and you'll see we have Wallaby.js, and you see this publisher has ownership of Wallaby.js.com. That's us,
And I
and
see that
you.
Wallaby is verified.
Yeah, that's right. We actually only did that recently. I'm not sure how long that was available. I think it was in a recent VS Code update. But yes, we only just did that in the last month or so.
Yeah, Tabnine just got
So all you have.
Tabnine just got verified too.
Oh, did they? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was a relatively recent thing on the marketplace. Okay, so we're going to install the extension, and you'll see here Wallaby has been installed. I've actually had Wallaby installed before, so by default on a fresh install, what you'll see is the Wallaby start page will appear, and so it gives you a nice little intro to Wallaby. You can watch a previous webinar that we've recorded. It's available on YouTube. There's an interactive tutorial. That really is a great way to get started. It really goes through all of the features. I'm not going to go through all of the features in a lot of depth today, but the interactive tutorial is a great way to really learn the product. It probably would take you, let's say, 30 to 40 minutes of your time, and you'll kind of go through all of the features.
I tried it.
We have
I tried it
tutorial.
myself, and it really helped me.
Oh, awesome. That's great. We also have some tutorials that are specific to individual testing frameworks if you wanted to run through those. What's new section of our docs, so you can be notified about new features as they're released. We don't spam people with the what's new section, so don't worry too much about leaving that enabled. It's really just big features, and we try and bucket up features, so we only really update this every couple of months, so we don't bother people. You can also activate your license. As I said, I had this previously installed, so um, my license was already activated. But you can also, if you've installed for the first time, you can request a trial. The Wallaby start page actually allows you to go and request a trial, and you can start it out and use all of the fully functional features for 14 days just to see what it's like. Um, we have a couple of key settings. We've got more settings that are buried in the VS Code settings page, but we have a couple of the key settings that you might actually want to tweak, and some more esoteric ones that you can click on more settings to get to, and then just a couple of resources.
Looks like pretty much everything can be personally configured.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be configured. That's right. Hopefully it's not too confusing. We keep it there because there are a lot of features to Wallaby. There are a lot of different ways of doing the same thing. So we try and make sure that we work with any developer's workflow if we like. So as a productivity tool, we really want to not get in the way of people. So if you find that there is some sharp edge that you're not happy with, chances are our documentation may give you another way of doing the same thing that's going to work more nicely for you.
Good to know.
Yeah, so I've got the shell of a project. We don't actually have any source files yet, so it's an empty project. Let's have a quick look at the package.json. So what I've done is I've created a little npm package that's got Jest, TypeScript installed, as well as Babel and some other Jest dependencies to work with TypeScript.
Are these dependencies mandatory to run tests in general, or to run tests in Wallaby?
Jest is the most popular testing framework at the moment, and so we focus pretty heavily on making sure that we support Jest. So Jest with TypeScript, you're probably going to want these dependencies, but you don't have to use Jest with Wallaby. We integrate with a number of different testing frameworks like Ava, Karma, Jasmine. So you could use any number of different testing frameworks, but I thought for today, because Jest is really the most widely used right now, I thought we'd start with Jest just to keep things familiar for people.
Okay, great.
So we've got we've got a package.json file with a couple of dependencies. We have the default Jest configuration file. I haven't even changed this file, so it has all of the comments, everything else sitting there. And we have the default Jest recommended Babel configuration to transform our TypeScript to JavaScript in order for Jest to be able to run our tests.
Okay.
So last time when we were using Quokka with Tabnine, I think we created a stateless calculator, and I thought maybe for today's demo we'll stick with the calculator theme because it's easy for people to understand. We don't have to get into some complex code that people aren't familiar with, and we might create a stateful calculator this time.
Okay.
It's going to have a little bit more logic that we need to test. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new file. I'll call it calculator.ts, and I'll say export default class. Oh, okay, here we go. Thank you, Tabnine.
You're welcome.
Calculator. And look, we might start with a default value. So I'll say private current value, which is a number. Again, Tabnine's doing the coding for me. And I might also want to be able to get the current number. So I might say public get value. And again, Tabnine actually suggested that, and I got rid of it by mistake. And return this.current value. And we might also have a set value function. So I might say public. And I don't want to set the value explicitly with a setter. I might actually like to say set value, which has a value, which is a number, and return void. And I'll say this.current value equals value. Okay. So that's our calculator class. Now let's write a simple test for that class. And so I'm going to have calculator.spec.ts. So we're going to first import our calculator class. So import calculator from calculator. I think Tab9 did that for us.
Yep.
And we're going to describe our calculator tests. And let's say it should set and get correct value. Correct value. So just writing a simple test for that getter and setter that we wrote before. And so say, Tab9 is helping me. This is good. calculator equals new calculator. Again, thank you, Tabnine. I like that one. And we'll say calculator dot, is it set value? Yep. And let's call it 5. I'll say expect calculator dot value to be 5. All right. So we've installed Wallaby, but we're not going to run using Wallaby quite yet. I just want to show you what it looks like to run outside of Wallaby.
Mhm.
In our project, when we installed Jest, it added a test script to our project. So we're going to run npm run test, and it is failing, and it's telling us that we need at least one test. And I think that might be because I haven't saved my file. So I'm going to save the file and npm run test. Okay, so calculator has run, but it's run into a problem, and it has said that default is not a constructor. And why doesn't it like that? And I think it might be because I haven't actually initialized the calculator. It needs a constructor to initialize the value. Let's try running that again. And everything ran successfully. So I was missing a default value for current value, and it didn't like that. So that's all working now. So that's what it looks like to run tests without Wallaby. So we'll have there are a number of different ways to run tests without Wallaby, but this is one of them using the CLI. And with Jest, you can also, I believe, say put it into watch mode, which means that
It will give
actually, I think
it will give you a live live blogging of your failing tests.
yes, that's right. And let's try it again. Okay, so npx jest watch. Okay, I have to do watch all because I don't have git installed. Okay, so it's run my test, and then if I go and change them, I don't have autosave turned on. So if I save the file, it's run the test again, and you can see that it's now failing because we're setting the value to 5 and it's expecting 6. And if I run it again, so you can see we've got this console output that we kind of read through to work out whether our tests are passing or failing. Now let's actually use Wallaby. So we've got Wallaby installed in our command palette, and you can see we've done this before. We're going to use Wallaby.js start to start Wallaby in our project. And down the bottom right-hand side, you may see there's a little status bar indicator that appeared when we asked Wallaby to start. And now that status bar indicator has a cross with 0 and a tick with 1. And that means the progress bar that you saw was Wallaby is doing something. It's running our tests. It's starting our project. The cross with the 0 means that there's 0 failing tests. And the tick with the 1 means there's 1 passing test. And if I click on this particular status bar indicator, you'll see that Wallaby test output appears, and we have some detail that's appearing here. So we're not getting a lot of detail in this output window right now because everything's good. But let's again go and change this value from 5 to 6 and see what happens. So change it to 5 from 5 to 6, and now you can see we had our indicators changed. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. We've got our error appearing in line beside our code, and we've also got the output window that's updated to show a bit of information as to what's going wrong.
So now, now we have 3 different. Actually, we have 4 different indications for the passing tests and the failing tests. We can see it up in the file itself, down at the output terminal, and also in the status bar. And you didn't talk about the little colorful squares, but they're an indication also, correct?
That's right, and in fact, there are a couple of other ways as well. There's a problems view as well. So Wallaby integrates with your VS Code problems view, so you can also see that problem is being reported there, and there are VS Code hotkeys to quickly navigate to problems in your project. And any problems that are part of this problem view actually also get highlighted in VS Code. So you see this particular that file is red as well, which means that there's a problem in that file. So there's a lot of different things going on that Wallaby is doing with VS Code to really allow you, depending again upon your workflow, you can quickly see where the problems are and how to get to them.
Just to make sure that I'm not missing anything.
That's right.
I like it.
So one thing I should point out is just like Quokka, Wallaby runs on your unsaved files. So in this particular case, we haven't actually saved this file yet, and I can save it now. It's not going to do anything. But when we were running from the command line, you saw we actually had to save the file in order for the test to start running. But Wallaby is watching every keystroke, and if there's more than, I think it's something like 250 milliseconds between keystrokes, it's going to go and try and run your tests again. And the other nice thing, Yotam, that Wallaby does is it keeps track of how all of your source code and your tests relate to each other. So it only needs to run the tests that have actually, or that are actually related to the current code that you're editing, or it only needs to run the current test that you're editing in some cases, if that makes sense.
At one time, at another time, in a different video, we're gonna talk about everything that's going on under the hood, because you made some incredible work here. But okay, let's continue.
Yeah, let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to create another test this time. So I'm going to say it should. I'm just going to say take a long time. It should take a long time, and I'm going to make this an asynchronous test. And I'm hoping, because I don't really remember how to write promises, that Tabnine is going to help me with this. So I want to say I want to await for a new promise. Yes, with resolve. And yeah, that's what I want. And you can see Wallaby's actually executing down the bottom, and still executing. And now we've got a timeout. Yeah, so we had this timeout. So it took up to 5 seconds to timeout, and that timeout's coming from a jest configurable setting. So we were saying we were awaiting this promise that never actually resolved. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a timeout and have it resolve the promise after 1 second. So let's say I want to return, I want to say set timeout, and I want to just call the resolve function after 1 second. Okay. All right, so what you see beside the test is Wallaby's actually telling you how long that code took to execute. So you'll see it took 1,001 milliseconds to execute, it took 2 milliseconds to execute. So you would think that this entire file is going to take 1,000 milliseconds roughly plus 2 milliseconds to execute. But with Wallaby, because it keeps track of all of the dependencies between your code, it's only going to execute the test that it knows has changed. So as I change this code, you'll see you'll have to keep track, keep a really close eye on. You'll find as soon as we change this from 6 to 5, Wallaby is executed straight away. And you see in this particular case, it took 0 milliseconds to execute that test. And it didn't even execute this other test at all, because Wallaby knew that this particular test was unrelated to that code change. So this allows Wallaby to give you a really, really fast feedback loop as you're writing your code and as you're writing your tests.
That's super cool.
So I'm going to remove this this little example because we don't really need it right now. And what I might do is just go over briefly what the code indicators mean again. I know that we covered it when we were demonstrating Quokka with Tabnine, but I thought
let's
might
do
not
it again.
hurt just to go through them again. Yeah. Okay. So we've you see I've introduced our problem again. We have green indicators, and green indicators mean the code up until this point executed successfully. You see that we've got some dark red indicators, and a dark red beside a test here means that this is a failing test. And dark red outside of a test means that this particular code is part of a stack trace.
Okay.
And you notice we've got this pink color as well.
What does that mean?
So pink means that this code was executing on the way to an error. So it may or may not be the cause of the problem, but it's certainly related to a subsequent failure. So if you, in this particular case, this line executed, and then we had the problem. And so Wallaby has said, look, these two lines were related to this particular error.
Okay.
And there's actually, there are two other colors that I'd like to show you. Let's just make a little contrived example. So I'm going to say if, let's say false and true, then I want to say console.log impossible to get here. Okay, and VS Code static analysis knows that it's impossible to get to. That's why it's highlighted this particular line of code for us. But in this case, the false statement will actually cause further evaluation of our if statement to fail or to be ignored. And so in this particular case, the if statement has executed the false part of the statement has executed, but true hasn't, and this console log hasn't executed it at all. So what you see is this yellow color means that part of the line of code executed, and the white means none of this particular line of code executed.
Can you tell me which part was
and
executed?
Wallaby has a really nice feature that allows you to quickly see.
Oh.
Exactly. So what you can do, you could say, I'd like to toggle uncovered code regions. And there's a keyboard shortcut for that. So Control Shift R and U on Windows. I think it's Command Shift R and U on Mac. And if we click on this particular command, you'll see we have the code that didn't actually execute highlighted in VS Code.
So useful.
So that's another little handy feature when it comes to code coverage.
One of the countless
features. Let's have a bit of a look at. Yeah, there are a lot. Let's actually have a look at what errors look like in Wallaby. And what we might do is we might set up a new function. We might do some test-driven development. So we would say it should correctly divide, and we don't have a divide function yet. And I'm going to copy our const calculator, and I'm going to say calculator.divide by 0. Expect calculator divide by 0 to be 0. That's not actually what I want to do. I want to introduce an error. But you can see we actually have an error right now, and it's being reported in line. And I can actually hover over the error, and you can see that we have Wallaby reporting there's a type error. Calculator divide is not a function, and Wallaby is actually providing us a couple of context-based actions. So we can debug the test if we want. We're going to have a quick look at that later, or we can show the error details. But let's go and implement this divide function, because with test-driven development, that's what we would do. So we're going to say, I want a public divide function. Oops, I've got a typo there. And we'll say, Tabnine value number, and let's accept void as the return type right now. And I want to say this dot current value equals this dot current value divided by value. That is what I want. Although I might actually want to put that there and get rid of that just for brevity. Okay, so now I have my divide function, but I might also want to add some error checking. So I might want to say if the value is 0, then throw a new error. Okay, division by error. Yep, division by 0 error. Okay. And you see, as we've written that code, Wallaby's actually gone and updated for us and has executed. So you can see now this is the cause of the problem. Before, the divide function didn't exist, but now we have a different problem. And in fact, in this error hover that we see, you can see we've got some different actions available. So before we had debug test and show error details, because Wallaby knew that we were already in the test. But now we could actually say go to the test to see what's wrong. And before, there wasn't really much of a stack trace because it was just a type error. But now we actually have a stack trace available to us, and Wallaby is showing that. So it's saying that at calculated TS line 14, column 6, we have this throw new error, and that is being called from our calculator spec. So let's go back to our calculator spec, and I'm just going to fix this test. What I want to do is I want to say, for our stateful calculator, I want to divide by 0, and then I want to say expect the calculator value to be 0. but I still have a problem because I shouldn't be divided by 0. One of the other ways that we can actually get error details in Wallaby is simply to select a line. So if I triple click in VS Code,
Triple
1, 2,
click?
3, yep, triple click will select the line for us.
Now we have a new window.
And we have a new window. So Wallaby Output Inspector is actually now displayed. So when you triple click on an error, or when you select a line with an error, Wallaby will automatically display this particular view of your error, which we've called Output Inspector. So this has a little bit more context. And again, you can see similar context to what we had before. So remove, debug test, go to error. But then we have a similar stack trace. And here you can see we've got some lines that are grayed out. And Wallaby is actually putting a little bit of extra context around your stack trace so you can see what was going on. So it's a little bit of a supercharged stack trace. And so let's shift escape to close the window. Okay. And we might go and fix this now. So we might say divide by 2 and the world is good. Let's actually put the problem back right now. And I want to jump to the error source. So I'm going to use Wallaby command jump to error source. So I can jump to a failing test, or I can jump to the error source. So I'm going to, and you can see there's a keyboard shortcut for that, Control Shift RP. So jump to error source, and Wallaby takes me straight to the error. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try Wallaby's debugger. So Wallaby has a debugger that we created specifically for the context of when you're writing code related to, or your test being run. So we're going to say let's debug.
So a different debugger that you.
It's a different take on a debugger. That's right. It's not as rich as like a Node.js debugger, but in the context of writing your test, it's actually super helpful, and you don't necessarily need all the richness because you're not going to the same levels of depth when you want to try and work out why something isn't working as you'd expect. So we're going to run this debug test, and you'll see there are a few things that just went on with our screen. So first thing, this Wallaby tools section popped up, which has a debugger portion of it. We've also have some debug actions that have appeared on top of our file.
Oh, up there on the right.
Up there on the right. And the line of code that I was on has suddenly got some sort of highlighting color to it. And that's the Wallaby debugger telling you that this is the current line of code that's being run in the debugger. So starting the debugger on a line of code, Wallaby will take you straight to that particular point in your code. I said the Wallaby debugger is a little bit different. It's a time travel debugger.
Time travel debugger.
Time travel. So that means you can actually move backwards. So you can step backwards and forwards in your code. And again, unlike the normal JavaScript debugger, it supports edit and continue. So let's have a look at what happens if we modify our code. So here I'm saying if the value is 0, then we're going to give this division by 0 error. But if I change this to 1, which isn't actually what we want, but let's change it to 1, you can see that the current step has shifted because everything was offset by our change. And if I change it back to 0, you can see that step has moved back to where we started. But I can also actually go and step back over, which on Windows is Control F10. And so I'm just going to use the button on the top right hand side. So step back over, and we can step back through our code, back into the test, back through to the calculator. So we can see exactly what happened. And if I go back to my calculator and I can say, well, look, I really want to come back here. And I can say, run forward to the active line, to the current line. And the debugger will run back to the current line. And I can also simply select a value. So if I select this value here, Wallaby will output the runtime value right here for us. So you can see beside that line of code, there's a 0 that's appeared because the value that was passed in is 0.
That's very, very useful. This should, in my opinion, this debugger should be its own product, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, I don't know how useful it would necessarily be outside of the testing context for running tests. As soon as we added the feature, I think I told you when we were going through Quokka, we dog food all of our products. So we use all of our products on a daily basis. And as soon as we added the debugger, we found we were using it almost every single day because it really speeds up trying to find out why a test is broken, why something's not working. It's actually very, very cool feature. Um, I do want to show you its little brother or big brother, depending upon which way we want to look at it. So I'm going to stop the debugger right now. Go back to our spec. So you see we have this debug code lens. Well, we also have another code lens called view story. And it's closely related to the debugger. So in the context of what we call a story, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute, the debugger is fully available to you. One of the things we were struggling with as developers using Wallaby was we would often be working with unfamiliar code. Could have been a customer project. It could have been some of our own code that was written 3 or 4 years ago. And we needed to understand what it did. And the more we thought about it, we kind of realized that the way that you write your code isn't necessarily the best way to understand it. It's the best way to make it testable. It's the best way to create the right abstractions that's going to make your code stand the test of time, if you like. But in order to understand it, it can actually be quite hard, especially when you have a lot of abstractions. So we created this this kind of start to finish view of your code that we called a test story. So let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go view story for this particular test. And what you'll see is Wallaby is showing you exactly how or exactly which lines of code executed as a part of this test. I'm just going to collapse this output window from start to finish. And this isn't a very long example, so it's actually fairly easy to understand outside of the test story. But you can see we start with our calculator spec TS file. We import calculator. Then Wallaby actually went and ran the describe block for your test, the it block for your test, but it didn't run this test, right? Because that's not what we're looking at right now. But then it ran this, and so you can see exactly which lines of code executed up into, in this particular case, the error. And if we were to change this, so let's go change this from 0 to 2, you can see that our test story has updated, and you can see exactly what was executed as part of that particular test. That test story.
How does that even work?
Under the covers, Wallaby does a lot to provide the features that it provides. So one of the first things that we do after relying on whether it's Babel or Jest or TypeScript to compile your file to JavaScript, Wallaby actually goes and adds a lot of extra instrumentation. So we take the code that you've written or the code that's been transformed by TypeScript, and we go and augment it to provide these extra features. So one of the things that we do in the context of running a test story is, or the debugger for that matter, is we go and track every single operation of your code and report back on that so that we can provide this rich functionality.
Very, very, very cool. So what else?
So
what else are you going to show me?
So we've got a couple of things. I don't know how we're going for time. A couple of other things I wanted to show you. So I showed you that you can simply, when the debugger's running, you can simply select a value and see it, right? So see the runtime value. So let's again, I'm going to contrive an example. So I'm going to say now equals a new date. Okay. So in this particular case, I selected the value, nothing happens because the debugger is not running. If the debugger was running, I would see the current value. But what I can do is I can actually, with Wallaby, say, I want to show this particular value. Quokka actually has a similar feature. But if I say show this value, you see that Wallaby is showing you that value reported right in your editor. And even as you're, I don't know if you saw that update, as you're making code changes, the value is changing. So here it should change from 39 if I press enter.
So it keeps updating the value.
It keeps updating the value because it knew that you wanted that. And you can actually remove that value if you navigate to this line of code, and I think it's escape. will remove that value, so you're not logging it anymore. So you don't have to make your editor noisy with all these logged values as you were trying to explore what was going on. But if you wanted a value to persist indefinitely, you could, for example, and let's actually do the calculator object, you could say use our special live comment format, so // ? And Wallaby will always output that value for you. So that's another thing that you can do with Wallaby and inspecting runtime values. You can actually also, if you wanted to say, I would like to copy the current value, which will copy it to the clipboard. And if I go and paste that, I'll just put a comment. You can see Wallaby's actually copied that to your clipboard for you. So there are a couple of there's actually a lot to logging values with Wallaby. We have a couple of more advanced features like the ability to proxy an object and see how and where it's changing throughout your tests. Again, Quokka has the same feature, but our docs have got a lot of good information on that if you wanted to explore a little bit more.
Can you talk about the Wallaby app?
Yeah. Let's take a look at Wallaby app. So let's work out how to get there first. So down the bottom in our status bar, if we click on that, we'll bring up our output window, and we'll follow this link to launch our coverage in Test Explorer. And when we launch that,
this is the browser now.
Yeah. So what's happened is we clicked on that link, and Wallaby app has launched in our browser. And you'll see that we're saying Wallaby.js.com up the top.
I'll try to push the window a little down so everyone can see the URL input. So that's gonna be my screen. There it is. Okay.
So you'll see that we actually have Wallaby.js.com up the top here. Wallaby isn't connecting to the internet at all. Everything's actually running on localhost. We just have a vanity URL, and within that particular URL, the client side of what you're seeing in Wallaby app is running, but it's all connecting to your local host.
So Wallaby is running an integration between the IDE. Does it work like in any IDE or just in VS Code?
No, it works in all IDEs.
So it integrates the IDE with the browser.
Correct.
Nice.
Correct. So in the case of VS Code, you can only, at least right now, you can only have one window up at a time. So if you have a multi-monitor setup and you're using Wallaby, then you could very well have Wallaby app on one screen and VS Code on another. Let's I'll just explain what's going on the UI briefly, and then I'll show you how it connects. And what you're seeing in Wallaby app is all updated in real time, and it's like a top-down view of your entire project. A good way to work with the tests and work with your code coverage outside of like a very sort of tactical view or operational view of what you're doing when you're writing a code. So first thing to note in Wallaby app, you've actually got two tabs, and you may not be able to see them exactly, but there's a test tab and a files tab. And the test tab is a really good way to explore the tests in your project. So everything's collapsed by default, but if, for example, I expand this, I can see my calculator spec. I have calculator tests, and we have a couple of different things going on. So we've got two tests: should set and get correct value, should correctly divide. And you can see that logged value is actually being reported here as well. That's that blue. That blue indicates that there's a logged value associated with that particular test. You've also got some filters. So if I wanted to say only find the tests that have divide in it, I can type divide up the top. If you're working in a really large project and you have some slower tests, you might want to work on those slower tests to optimize their performance. So you can say, show me all the tests that are slower than 500 milliseconds, for example, or you've got a lot of failing tests or some tests with logging that shouldn't have logging, then you can use these filters up the top to navigate through to those tests. You see up the top, you've got, this is our calculator project. So Wallaby's opened the project for us. It is telling us the overall code coverage for our project right now is sitting at 83.33%.
This is why it's green, because it's okay.
Yeah, it's green. So I think Wallaby has some defaults for code coverage. I think it might be 80% is the default for good. And I think if you have, you can also configure that for your project. So if you drop below the 80%, you'll see that actually changes color. Let's go back to our code and see what that looks like. So I have a calculator function. So we've got divide. Let's add another function. Let's call it add public add value number. And in fact, I want to return void. And I haven't actually really written any code yet. Tabnine's done it for me. And so this dot current value. Yeah. Oh, it was there. Plus equals value. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay. So now I have add. Now let's go back to Wallaby app, and you can see the code coverage changed. So in real time, Wallaby's keeping track as though it knows there's additional operations in that file that haven't been covered by any tests.
And can I fix problems in the app
the app is read-only.
And apply them to the IDE?
No, the app's read-only. So we have a couple of things. So for example, you could let's actually just go to the files section now, because I think we've got this stuff's pretty self-explanatory. So if we go to files, again, you can see the roll-up of our coverage. If we have multiple different spec files or code files, you'll see that rolls up across all files. You can see that we've got the uncovered regions that are being highlighted for us automatically, whereas in the editor, because it's a little bit distracting, you have to manually go and turn that on if you want to see those uncovered regions. But you can't edit any code here. All of this is read-only, but it does connect to the browser, and it knows as soon as we start editing something. So if I go back, let's introduce, let's just make another change. So I've just changed that, come back here. You see Wallaby app is updated straight away. So it does keep in sync with the editor, but it's a read-only view. What you can do, having said that, is wherever you see this little icon with the editor, it actually says locate in editor.
Yeah.
And there's a keyboard shortcut for that as well. So if you click on that, and in fact, I'm already in this particular location. So let's just change to our spec file. And we say, look, I want to locate this in the editor and go back to VS Code. It's taken us to this file. So it switched us from the spec to here. And similarly, if I'm in the tests and I say, look, I want to work on the should correctly divide test, locate in editor, and go back to VS Code, it's taken us there. So there is a connection.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's everything's updating together in both places, but you can navigate between. I don't believe there's any way that you can navigate to anywhere in Wallaby app, but Wallaby app can certainly go and launch things in the editor.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, I think the final other like big ticket items that are worth mentioning, like I said, problems are reported in the problems window. We have a deep integration with VS Code. So VS Code recently released a testing, like core part of VS Code is their test explorer. So Wallaby integrates with that test explorer, and we actually worked with the VS Code team when it was first released to help them fix a few bugs and gave them feedback on. Yeah, we gave them some feedback on some things that we thought, some little sharp edges. In fact, I think there was a sort by duration. I think I even added that as a feature. But yeah, we've worked pretty closely with them to make sure that we're giving the optimal experience for. Wasn't really that hard, but I think the only other feature that's worth kind of talking about, and I mentioned before, Wallaby has been designed to work really quickly, even for large projects. So if you had a lot of spec files, or even a really large monorepo that you're working with, you can configure Wallaby just to run for a specific project in a large monorepo, or even on a single test file. So if I stop Wallaby, and again, this isn't necessarily the best project example, but you can get the idea. I can right-click on a file and I can say Start Exclusive Test Run, and Wallaby will only, regardless of what else exists in your project, Wallaby will only run the tests that are related to that calculator spec.ts that I said Start Exclusive Test Run. And you could, if you had other files, you could say add other files to your exclusive test run as well. So you're building up and just running the bare minimum. Again, you've got a large project. It might take 10 minutes to run all of your tests, or there might be integration tests that you don't want to write. You don't want to run. You only want to run some unit tests, and you can do that with Wallaby. So there's nothing in particular that you have to worry about there. You can also, if you're working on a specific test, you can also choose to focus on just that test, which means that all of the code indicators and all of the inline values that are displayed are just for that single test. So there are.
Can you show what happens when you click on that?
Yeah, let's create a little example. So I have our calculator. I've got set value here and divide here. So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to say here, let's focus on this particular test. You can see immediately in our test, the other indicators have been hidden because that test never executed. But if I go to our calculator, and in fact, I'll split it to the right, and I'll just collapse this.
Thanks.
Okay, so only the lines of code that were covered as a part of this first test are showing up in green. Everything else is white because the test that we're focusing on never executed any of that code. So if I remove the filter, we go back to showing all of the code that was executed. If I conversely focus on the should correctly divide, you'll see that the set current value never gets called. You see that changed from green to white. And you can actually focus on multiple tests at the same time. So you could say, I want to focus on this test and I want to focus on this test. You can see everything is now covered. So you've got the ability to play around with that to just really narrow in understanding what your code was doing as you're working on a particular bug or feature or test.
So everything can be configured. Everything can be self-tailored to however I want to work. I can let Wallaby run and test all of my tests, or I can focus on specific places where I want Wallaby to run.
Yeah, that's right. And like like I said, there are a lot of features that I haven't necessarily covered today. So, for instance, you could search tests. And this is a really simple example. There are only 2 tests, but you can search tests. You can see quickly which are passing and failing with some tick boxes. And there's a whole bunch of Wallaby.js commands. So jumping to the error source, we had a look at toggling uncovered code regions. I didn't mention that we have support for snapshots. So Wallaby will, if you're using a testing framework that supports snapshots. So I don't know if you know what snapshots are.
Yeah,
Yotam?
when it checks if anything in my UI changed.
Kind of, it's not necessarily UI. It's the shape of the thing that you're testing. But yeah, if that changes at all,
I know
you can also
from UI.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can also show all of the tests that are covering a particular line of code, side by side diff for anything that is failing. So you could see like a side by side diff to see why something might not be working. Launching the Coverage Explorer. You can also, and again, this is great for larger projects. You can actually switch Wallaby to only run when you save. So you could say run on any change immediately as you type, or only run my test as I save. So if you have a slower project that might be doing a lot of work, or maybe even running integration tests, hitting an external API, maybe you don't want it to run until you choose to save. And we have some tutorials. You have the ability to profile a test, so you can actually let's have a quick look at that. You can hit this profile code lens here and say open the profile in VS Code. So Wallaby will go and run the Node.js profiler and show the results to you either in Chrome or in VS Code, and you can use the heat map VS Code extension to actually see what's going on there. So definitely a lot to check out. I think I might have mentioned to you, and I'll just bring it over to the other screen. I think I might have mentioned to you that we have a really good interactive tutorial. So you can access that through the VS Code start page, but that's a great way to get started. Probably take you 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, and that gives you a more in-depth look at all of the features and teaches you how to do some of those things.
Such a great way to let people know how to use a tool, an extension, just to give them a quick start of like interactive tutorial. It's a great way.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we always heavily focus on as a team is that user experience. I think that's those ergonomics in Wallaby are kind of where we've come from, and creating that from end to end, from when you first see the product to you continue using it, is really something that we care a lot about.
Great. So, what else do we have to cover today?
No, I think we've covered everything. Our website is a great way to get started. We've got a lot of detail in the docs, like you said. The interactive tutorial is really fantastic. Probably take you 30 to 40 minutes if you're a little bit experienced. We've got some socials as well. So we've got a Discord channel that's on our website, so people can join Discord if they've got some questions. Feel free to ask. We're always happy to help. We're on various socials, Twitter, Facebook, and email, of course, if people don't feel like reaching out publicly.
Simon, I want to personally thank you again for showing up today. I think this video can be very useful for those who aren't familiar with tools such as Wallaby, or specifically with Wallaby. And I encourage all of you who are watching us today to take a leap of faith and and add Wallaby to your IDs. As you can see, it works seamlessly with Tabnine, so no worries. And that's it, I think. Simon, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Thank you.